I moved into the old house on the hill, seeking solitude to finish my latest novel. The place had been abandoned for years, a creaking relic of a bygone era, perched on the edge of a dense forest. It was perfect, a writer's paradise, far from the distractions of city life. The real estate agent had mentioned the house's history in passing, something about it being a fixer-upper with character, but I didn't care. All I wanted was peace and quiet. The first few days were uneventful. I spent my time settling in, arranging my writing space, and exploring the house. It was a large, sprawling structure with countless rooms and winding hallways. The attic, however, was the most intriguing part. It was locked when I first arrived, the door sealed shut with rusted nails and an air of secrecy. Naturally, my curiosity got the better of me. One evening, armed with a crowbar and a flashlight, I decided to pry open the attic door. The wood groaned and splintered as the nails came loose. A cold draft swept down the stairs as the door finally gave way, revealing a dark and musty room filled with forgotten relics. Old furniture, dusty paintings, and piles of cobweb-covered boxes cluttered the space. But what caught my eye was an old, ornate chest tucked away in a corner. With a sense of unease, I approached the chest and opened it. Inside, I found a stack of leather-bound diaries, their pages yellowed with age. My heart raced as I flipped through them, the handwriting neat and precise. They belonged to a man named Thomas Carver, who had lived in the house over a century ago. The entries were filled with descriptions of dark rituals and strange occurrences. He wrote about summoning spirits, hearing voices in the night, and feeling a sinister presence lurking in the shadows. As a writer, I was fascinated by the contents of the diaries. They were a treasure trove of inspiration, a window into the mind of a disturbed man. But as I read further, I began to feel an odd sense of déjà vu. The events Thomas described felt strangely familiar, almost as if they were happening to me. I shrugged off the feeling and continued reading, unaware of the horrors that awaited me. That night I had trouble sleeping. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows and sending shivers down my spine. I tossed and turned, haunted by the words I had read. Suddenly I heard a faint tapping sound like fingernails on glass. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from the window. With trembling hands, I grabbed the flashlight and crept towards the window. The tapping stopped. I hesitated for a moment, then pulled back the curtains. My breath caught in my throat as I saw the pale, ghostly face staring back at me from the other side of the glass. Its eyes were hollow, and its mouth twisted into a grotesque smile. I stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. It clattered to the floor, and the room was plunged into darkness. The last thing I remember was the sound of the window shattering and a cold, bony hand reaching out towards me. Then, everything went black. I woke up in my bed, drenched in sweat, the remnants of my nightmare still clinging to my mind. Morning light filtered through the curtains and the room was silent. Had it all been a dream? The shattered window, the ghostly face, the cold hand, it seemed so real. I hesitated before pulling back the curtains again, half expecting to find the window broken. But it was intact, the glass smooth and unblemished. I tried to shake off the lingering sense of dread and returned to my daily routine. I made coffee, ate breakfast, and sat down to write, but my mind kept drifting back to the attic, the diaries, the face, the terror. I couldn't concentrate, so I decided to revisit the attic, hoping to find some rational explanation for what had happened. The attic was just as I had left it. dust motes dancing in the beams of sunlight that filtered through the small, grimy window. I approached the chest with the diaries and took out the one I had been reading. Flipping through the pages, I found the last entry where I had left off. Thomas Carver had written about the tapping on the window, the face and the hand reaching out to him. My blood ran cold as I read his words, realizing they mirrored my own experience from the night before. Determined to uncover the truth, I continued reading. Thomas described how the occurrences became more frequent and more violent. He wrote about objects moving on their own, whispers in the dark, and waking up with scratches on his arms. He believed he had summoned a malevolent spirit, and it was growing stronger with each passing day. Desperation bled through his words as he searched for a way to banish the entity, but his entries abruptly stopped. A sudden noise snapped me out of my trance. The sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor echoed through the house. My heart pounded in my chest as I made my way downstairs, following the noise. It led me to the living room, where an old antique mirror had been pushed away from the wall. In its place, a dark gaping hole yawned in the wallpaper. I approached the hole cautiously, peering inside. It was a small, hidden compartment, and inside was a bundle wrapped in a faded cloth. I carefully pulled it out and unwrapped it, revealing a collection of strange, archaic items. A small, intricately carved box, a bundle of dried herbs, and a tarnished silver dagger. Along with these items was a letter, its paper brittle and yellowed with age. The letter was addressed to the next resident and was written in the same handwriting as the diaries. Thomas Carver had left a warning, detailing his final attempt to rid the house of the spirit. He had performed a ritual using the items in the bundle, but he feared it hadn't worked. He wrote that the spirit was bound to the house, feeding off the fear and despair of its inhabitants. As I read the last lines of the letter, a chill ran down my spine. Thomas warned that anyone who disturbed the attic would awaken the spirit, and it would come for them. My hands shook as I put the letter down, the reality of my situation sinking in. The spirit was real, and I had unleashed it. Suddenly, the room grew cold and the lights flickered. A low, guttural growl emanated from the shadows, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, my breath hitching in my throat. There, standing in the doorway, was the figure from my nightmare. Its hollow eyes bored into mine, and it slowly raised a bony hand pointing directly at me. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. It started to move towards me, its movements slow and deliberate. The growling grew louder, more menacing. Panic surged through me as I realized there was no escape. The spirit was here, and it wanted something from me. I stumbled backward, my eyes locked on the ghostly figure inching toward me. The air around me felt thick, oppressive, each breath a struggle. I tried to think rationally, but my mind was a whirlwind of terror and confusion. The figure's growl resonated in my bones, freezing me in place. Desperation took over, and I grabbed the silver dagger from the bundle. The moment my fingers touched the cold metal, the figure hesitated, its hollow eyes narrowing. The growl softened to a low hum, almost curious. With trembling hands, I held the dagger out, a feeble barrier between myself and the advancing spirit. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The figure paused, its hand lowering. For a brief moment, hope flickered within me. Maybe the dagger had some power over it. But then, the figure's mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, and it lunged forward with inhuman speed. I swung the dagger wildly, but it passed through the figure as if it were made of smoke. The spirit vanished, leaving me panting and disoriented. The oppressive cold lifted, and the room returned to its eerie silence. I dropped the dagger, its clatter echoing through the empty house. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The figure had been real, tangible in its malevolence, yet it had disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. I picked up the letter again, rereading Thomas Carver's final words. He had mentioned a ritual, one that might banish the spirit for good. The instructions were vague, but I knew I had no other choice. If I didn't perform the ritual, the spirit would continue to haunt me, growing stronger with each encounter. Gathering the items from the hidden compartment, I made my way back to the attic. The diaries, the herbs, the carved box, and the dagger, each piece felt significant, though I didn't fully understand their purpose. I arranged them in a circle on the dusty attic floor, as best as I could interpret from Thomas's writings. As I lit the herbs, a pungent smoke filled the air, and I began to chant the incantation scribbled in the margins of one of the diaries. My voice wavered, but I forced myself to continue. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to dance around me. The feeling of being watched intensified, and I knew the spirit was near. The attic door slammed shut with a deafening bang, and the temperature plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs, and the candle flames flickered wildly. The spirit appeared again, materializing within the circle, its eyes burning with fury. It moved towards me, but this time, it seemed restrained, as if an invisible barrier held it back. I continued chanting, the words foreign and harsh on my tongue. The spirit's growl grew louder, reverberating through the attic. It thrashed against the barrier, its form shifting and contorting. The candles blew out, plunging the room into darkness, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Suddenly, the spirit let out a bone-chilling scream, and the force of it knocked me backward. The items in the circle glowed with an eerie light, and the spirit began to dissolve, its form disintegrating into the air. The scream faded, replaced by a deafening silence. I lay on the floor, gasping for breath, the attic now eerily quiet. Had it worked? Had I finally banished the spirit? The air felt lighter, the oppressive presence gone, relief washed over me, and I allowed myself to believe it was over. But as I gathered the ritual items, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the corner of the attic where the chest had been, there was now a small, ornate mirror. It hadn't been there before. I approached it cautiously, my reflection staring back at me. But then, behind my reflection, I saw the hollow eyes and twisted smile of the spirit. It hadn't been banished. It had found a new home. The mirror's surface rippled, and I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder. The last thing I heard was the spirit's malevolent whisper, "You can't escape me." I awoke in my bed again, the room filled with the dim light of dawn. I bolted upright, gasping for air, my heart pounding. The events of the night before replayed in my mind, the ritual, the spirit, the mirror. Had it all been a dream? I looked around, half expecting the attic to be gone, but everything was as it had been. The mirror in the attic and the chilling whisper were not figments of my imagination. I had to find a way to escape this nightmare. With renewed determination, I decided to research the history of the house and Thomas Carver. There had to be more to his story, something that could help me. I spent hours at the local library, poring over old newspapers and records. The house had a dark past, one filled with tales of disappearances and tragic deaths. But there was little about Thomas Carver, just a brief mention of him as a reclusive scholar with an interest in the occult. Frustrated and exhausted, I returned to the house. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Every creak and groan of the old house set my nerves on edge. The spirit was still here, lurking, waiting. That night, I decided to confront it again. Armed with the knowledge I had gathered and a renewed sense of purpose, I returned to the attic. The mirror stood in the corner, its surface gleaming ominously in the dim light. I approached it cautiously, my reflection staring back at me, but there was no sign of the spirit. I took a deep breath and began chanting the incantation again. The air grew cold and the shadows deepened. The mirror's surface rippled and the spirit's face emerged, its hollow eyes glaring at me with hatred. I held the silver dagger tightly, ready to defend myself. The spirit lunged at me, but this time I was prepared. I slashed at it with the dagger, the blade cutting through the air. The spirit recoiled, its form flickering. I continued chanting, the words gaining strength and power. The spirit let out a guttural roar, its form disintegrating into wisps of smoke. Just when I thought I was winning, the mirror shattered with a deafening crash. Glass shards flew everywhere, and I shielded my face with my arm. When I looked up, the attic was empty. The oppressive presence was gone, and the air felt lighter. I had done it. I had banished the spirit. Relief washed over me, and I allowed myself to hope that this ordeal was finally over. I spent the next few days trying to return to normalcy, focusing on my writing and trying to forget the horrors I had faced. The house felt different, less sinister, and I began to believe that I was safe. But then, strange things started happening again. Objects moved on their own, whispers echoed through the halls, and the cold spots returned. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard the faint tapping sound on the window again. My heart sank, and a sense of dread filled me. I slowly got out of bed and approached the window, my hands shaking. I pulled back the curtains, and there it was, the same ghostly face, staring at me with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. It had returned. The spirit had never truly left. Panic surged through me, and I backed away, only to feel a cold hand grip my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, and the room grew colder. Desperation took over, and I ran out of the room, down the stairs, and out of the house. I didn't stop until I was standing in the middle of the overgrown garden, gasping for breath. The house loomed behind me, dark and silent, its windows like empty eyes staring at me. I knew then that I couldn't stay here any longer. The spirit was bound to the house, and as long as I remained, it would haunt me. I had to leave, but I also knew that simply running away wouldn't be enough. I needed to find a way to destroy the spirit once and for all. As I stood in the garden, I felt a glimmer of hope. There had to be a way. I just needed to find it. And with that thought, I made my way back to the house, determined to uncover the secrets that would finally set me free. I spent the next few days frantically searching for a way to destroy the spirit. The house, once a sanctuary for my creativity, had become a prison of nightmares. Each corner seemed to hide a shadow, every whisper a reminder of the malevolent presence that haunted me. The spirit was relentless, and my sanity was fraying with each passing hour. I delved deeper into Thomas Carver's diaries, hoping to find some clue, some overlooked detail that might help me. As I read through his final, frantic entries, I discovered something chilling. Thomas had found an ancient book of rituals, a grimoire hidden in a secret compartment beneath the attic floor. The book contained powerful spells, including one that claimed to banish even the most malevolent spirits permanently. I tore through the attic, ripping up floorboards until I found the compartment. Inside was a dusty, leather-bound tome, its pages filled with cryptic symbols and ancient incantations. The book felt heavy with power and dread. My hands trembled as I turned the pages, searching for the banishment ritual. The ritual was complex, requiring a combination of rare ingredients and precise timing. The full moon was only a few nights away, and according to the grimoire, it was the only time the ritual would be effective. I had to act quickly. I gathered the required ingredients: sage, salt, candles, and a piece of the spirit's vessel, the shattered mirror. As the night of the full moon approached, the spirit's attacks grew more intense. I woke up with bruises and scratches, my dreams filled with horrifying visions of the spirit dragging me into darkness. The house groaned and creaked as if it was alive, feeding off my fear. Finally, the night of the full moon arrived. I set up the ritual in the attic, arranging the candles in a precise circle and sprinkling the salt around them. The mirror shards glinted ominously in the candlelight. I took a deep breath and began the incantation, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my insides. The air grew colder and the shadows deepened. The spirit materialized within the circle, its hollow eyes burning with fury. It lunged at me, but the salt barrier held it back. I continued chanting, the words flowing from my lips with an eerie familiarity. The spirit thrashed against the barrier, its form shifting and contorting. As I reached the climax of the ritual, a sudden, bone-chilling scream filled the attic. The spirit's form began to disintegrate, its hollow eyes wide with rage and fear. The candles flickered wildly and a gust of icy wind blew through the room. The spirit's scream grew louder, a final, desperate wail before it was torn apart by the power of the ritual. Then, silence. The candles went out, plunging the attic into darkness. I collapsed to the floor, my body trembling with exhaustion and relief. It was over. The spirit was gone, or so I thought. As I lay there, catching my breath, a soft, mocking laugh echoed through the attic. I sat up, my heart pounding. The laugh grew louder, more sinister. The temperature plummeted, and I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. The laugh continued, echoing off the walls. Desperation turned to horror as I realized the truth. The ritual hadn't destroyed the spirit. It had only made it stronger. The spirit had fed off my fear, my desperation, and now it was more powerful than ever. I stumbled out of the attic, the spirit's laugh following me down the stairs. The house was alive with its presence, every creak and groan a reminder that I was trapped. I couldn't stay here any longer. I had to leave, but where could I go? The spirit was bound to me now, not the house. With no other options, I grabbed my car keys and fled. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw the spirit sitting in the back seat, its hollow eyes staring at me. I blinked, and it was gone. But the feeling of being watched never left me. The spirit was with me, a constant, malevolent presence, and I knew that no matter where I went, I could never escape it. I drove for hours, the landscape outside blurring into a monotonous stretch of darkened road and shadowy trees. My mind raced, searching for a solution, a way out of this nightmare. The spirit's presence was palpable, a constant weight pressing down on my chest. I couldn't run forever. I needed to end this once and for all. I found myself on the outskirts of a small, forgotten town. There, nestled between overgrown woods and abandoned buildings, was an old, decrepit church. The steeple leaned to one side, and the windows were shattered, but something about it drew me in. Maybe it was desperation, or perhaps some deeper instinct, but I felt that this place held the answer I needed. I parked the car and approached the church, the spirit's presence growing stronger with each step. The door creaked open with a reluctant groan, revealing a dark, musty interior. Pews lay overturned, and cobwebs draped the corners. At the front of the church stood a large wooden cross, its presence both comforting and ominous. I made my way to the altar, the spirit's laughter echoing through the empty hall. I placed the grimoire on the dusty surface and began searching for a final solution. The pages rustled as I flipped through them, the ancient symbols and incantations blurring before my tired eyes. Then, I found it, a ritual of ultimate banishment, a spell that could sever the spirit's bond to the mortal world. But it required a sacrifice. The instructions were clear. To banish a spirit as powerful as this one, a life had to be offered willingly. My heart sank as I realized what this meant. The spirit's mocking laughter grew louder, as if it knew my thoughts and reveled in my despair. I took a deep breath and steeled myself. I had no other choice. If I didn't do this, the spirit would haunt me forever, and its power would only grow. I began the incantation, my voice echoing through the abandoned church. The air grew colder, and the spirit materialized before me, its hollow eyes filled with malevolent glee. As I chanted, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if the spirit was trying to tear my soul apart. I pushed through the pain, the words flowing from my lips with a desperate urgency. The spirit thrashed and howled, its form flickering and distorting. The final words of the incantation left my lips, and I felt a cold, sharp pain pierce my heart. I collapsed to the floor, my vision dimming. The spirit let out a final, bone-chilling scream before it disintegrated into nothingness. The air grew still, and the oppressive presence lifted. As darkness closed in around me, I felt a sense of peace. The spirit was gone, its bond severed. My sacrifice had worked. But as my vision faded, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, standing at the back of the church, was Thomas Carver. His hollow eyes and twisted smile mirrored the spirits. He stepped forward, his form shifting and contorting, merging with the shadows. "You can't escape me," he whispered, his voice a chilling echo. "We are bound, you and I." The realization hit me like a tidal wave. Thomas had never been a victim. He had been the true source of the malevolence, a dark entity masquerading as a mortal man. He had lured me here, used me to regain his strength. As the final moments of my life slipped away, Thomas's twisted smile was the last thing I saw. The church grew dark, and the oppressive presence returned, stronger than ever. My sacrifice had only fed the darkness, and now it would spread, claiming more victims. And somewhere, in a secluded house on a hill, a new writer would move in, seeking solitude and inspiration. They would find the diaries, and the cycle of terror would begin anew. The end.